Can I help you? The stranger asked me that from inside my own house. For a second, I honestly thought I had pulled into the wrong driveway. I looked back at the brass numbers beside the garage. 1847, Hawthorne Lane. Same address. Same two-story brick house. Same maple tree my father had planted 26 years earlier. But there was a blue minivan parked where my truck usually sat, two children's bicycles leaning against the garage, and yellow curtains hanging behind the living room windows. I walked back to the front door and tried my key again. It stopped halfway into the lock. Wrong cylinder. Someone had changed it. Through the open doorway came the smell of tomato sauce and garlic, followed by the sound of a television and a child laughing somewhere upstairs. The man facing me looked about 40, wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt. He was holding a grocery bag against his hip. He looked confused. I probably looked worse. "I am Michael Carter," I said. "I own this house." His expression changed immediately. "I think there is some mistake." Behind him, I could see cardboard moving boxes beside the staircase. A family photograph sat on my father's walnut entry table. Then I noticed the rocking chair in the corner of the living room. Dad's chair. It had always been beside the fireplace. Now somebody had moved it beneath the front window and draped a blue blanket across the back. That bothered me more than the changed lock. "Who gave you permission to move in?" I asked. The man carefully set the grocery bag down. "The Homeowners Association. We have an agreement." Before I could answer, tires rolled over the pavement behind me. A white sport utility vehicle stopped at the curb. Patricia Langford stepped out wearing a camel-colored coat and carrying the leather folder I had seen at enough association meetings to recognize from 50 feet away. Patricia was 56, president of Willow Creek Estates, and she walked toward my porch with the confidence of someone arriving to correct a problem she had already decided was mine. "Michael," she said. No surprise. No confusion. She knew exactly who I was. "You were notified about the occupancy." "I was notified about nothing." She glanced toward the man inside. "Evan, you can go back in. I will handle this." He hesitated, then stepped away from the doorway. Patricia lowered her voice. "You cannot show up after months away and disturb approved occupants." I stared at her. Cold October air moved through the maple leaves above us, and somewhere inside my house a kitchen timer started beeping. Approved by whom? The association. She said it casually, like those two words settled everything. I looked at the new lock, the unfamiliar minivan, the children's bikes, then back at Patricia. 5 months earlier, she had asked me in writing for permission to place someone in this house. I had said no. Now she was standing on my porch telling me the association had done it anyway. I did not argue. I did not touch the door. I asked one question. "Patricia, what document gave the association possession of my house?" Her mouth tightened for half a second. "There are procedures for vacant properties." That was not an answer, and I knew something she apparently did not. 40 miles away, inside a fireproof document box, I still had the original deed. 5 months earlier, that house had been quiet enough for me to hear the old furnace click on from the garage. I was 44, a commercial electrician, and most of my work took me wherever a hospital, warehouse, or office complex needed a crew for several months at a time. Hawthorne Lane was not where I slept every night, but it was home in every way that mattered. My parents had bought the place when I was 16. My father built the workbench in the garage himself, slightly crooked because he refused to admit the concrete floor was uneven. Inside the kitchen pantry, there were still pencil marks on the doorframe showing my height from high school. After my mother died, Dad stayed there another 7 years. When his health started declining, he transferred the property to me through the proper legal process, and we recorded everything with the county. I paid the property taxes. I carried the insurance. The electric, gas, and water accounts remained in my name. A landscaping company came every other Thursday during the growing season. Empty was not the same thing as abandoned. Patricia Langford apparently disagreed. Her first email arrived in April while I was preparing for a 5-month electrical project about 40 miles away. She said Willow Creek Estates had received concerns about prolonged vacancy at my address. I wrote back that the property was maintained, insured, monitored, and privately owned. A week later, she complained that the blinds remained closed for extended periods and claimed the house created a negative visual impression. I almost laughed. My father's blinds had apparently become a threat to property values. Then Patricia changed her approach. She sent me information about what she called an association-approved temporary occupancy program. According to her email, Placing a screened family in the home would create a lived-in appearance, discourage maintenance issues, and support neighborhood stability while I was away. She described it like she was offering me a favor. I read the proposal twice at my kitchen table. Then I typed a simple response. I do not authorize the association or any third party to occupy, lease, manage, access, or take possession of my property. Please consider this request denied. I saved the email and printed a copy. Patricia replied the next morning. We acknowledge your position, although the association retains enforcement authority under the governing documents. I printed that too. Before leaving for the project, I walked through the house one final time. I shut off unnecessary appliances, checked the smoke detectors, lowered the thermostat, and covered Dad's walnut entry table with a cotton sheet. In the living room, his rocking chair sat beside the fireplace where it had always been. The place smelled faintly of cedar from the hallway closet and the lemon oil I had used on the woodwork. In the garage, I opened a gray fireproof document box and checked the papers inside. Insurance policy, tax records, closing documents, and the original recorded deed showing the chain of ownership that ended with my name. I considered leaving the box in the house, then changed my mind. I carried it to my truck and stored it at the small apartment I used near the job site. At the time, it felt like ordinary caution. Before pulling away, I looked back at the house through the windshield. Lawn trimmed, mail forwarding active, security system armed, taxes current, insurance current, utilities active. Every legal and practical sign of ownership was exactly where it belonged. The only thing missing was me. Apparently, Patricia decided that was enough. For the first 6 weeks after I left Hawthorne Lane, nothing seemed unusual. The landscaping company emailed photographs after each visit, the security system sent its weekly status report, and every utility payment cleared automatically from my account. Then the association letters started. I did not see them at first because Patricia sent them to the house instead of the mailing address I had provided to Willow Creek Estates. I learned about them later, after everything had already happened. The first notice claimed the property showed signs of extended vacancy. The second cited closed blinds, limited exterior activity, and an accumulation of advertising material near the front entry. That last one was interesting because I had active mail forwarding and no advertising material appeared in any photograph from my landscaper. The third notice declared the house subject to enhanced vacant property monitoring under the association rules. Patricia documented each letter as an attempt to contact me. Meanwhile, my email inbox stayed completely quiet. No message, no telephone call, no request for confirmation. Nothing. About 2 months into my job, my security application suddenly reported that the front door sensor was offline. I noticed it during lunch while sitting in my truck outside a commercial renovation site. I called the monitoring company. The representative told me the system itself was functioning, but the front entry sensor had stopped communicating. I assumed the battery had failed. That was my mistake. 3 days later, the entire system showed a maintenance interruption lasting 47 minutes before reconnecting. Again, I assumed equipment trouble. What I did not know was that Patricia had already begun building a different version of my property on paper. In that version, I was an unreachable owner. The house was deteriorating through vacancy. The association had exhausted reasonable contact attempts. Neighborhood interests supposedly required intervention. Weeks later, I reconstructed what happened from invoices, meeting records, and statements from people who had been there. On a Tuesday morning in July, a locksmith arrived at 1847 Hawthorne Lane in a white service van. Patricia met him in the driveway carrying her leather folder. A neighbor later remembered seeing her standing on my porch while the lock was replaced. 2 days after that, a cleaning crew entered. The following weekend, a moving truck backed into my driveway. Evan Mitchell, his wife Laura, and their 2 children carried boxes through my front door, believing they had every right to be there. They were not sneaking into an empty house. They had paperwork. They had keys. They had been told the association was authorized to manage the property through a community occupancy arrangement. Patricia had given them enough official-looking documentation to make the situation appear ordinary. Evan later told me that he had specifically asked whether the owner knew about the arrangement. He said Patricia answered that the necessary approvals had been handled through the association. That sentence would matter later. At the time, I knew none of it. I was 40 miles away pulling cable through a mechanical room and thinking the worst problem waiting for me at Hawthorne Lane was probably a dead security sensor. Near the end of September, the project finished ahead of schedule. I packed my apartment, loaded the fireproof document box into my truck, and decided to drive directly to the house before checking into anywhere else. I wanted to open the windows, restart the water heater, and sleep in my father's old home for the first time in months. I remember turning on a Hawthorne Lane and noticing the blue minivan before I even reached the driveway. Then I saw the bicycles. Then the curtains. By the time I parked, I already knew the dead door sensor had never been the problem. Somebody had not just entered my house. Somebody had prepared it for a new family. After Patricia told me the association had approved the occupants, I stepped away from the porch and called the non-emergency police number from my truck. I wanted a record of what I had found, but I also knew enough not to make the situation worse by forcing my way through a door with a changed lock. About 25 minutes later, an officer named David Reynolds pulled into the driveway. Patricia was still there. Evan had come back outside carrying a folder. The officer listened while each of us explained our version. I showed him my driver's license, insurance information, and a digital copy of my latest property tax statement. Evan opened his folder and handed over what looked like a temporary occupancy agreement bearing the Willow Creek Estate's name. Patricia calmly explained that the association had acted under its vacant property procedures. Officer Reynolds read the documents twice, then looked at me. "Mr. Carter, I can document what you are reporting, but I cannot determine ownership and possession rights from competing paperwork standing in a driveway." I understood. I am not asking you to remove anyone tonight. I want it documented that I never authorized this. He nodded and added it to his report. That was when Evan looked at me differently. Until then, I think he had assumed I was some former tenant or angry relative. "You really own this place?" he asked. "Yes." His wife, Laura, appeared behind the screen door. She looked worried, not defensive. That mattered. I asked Evan who had given him the keys. He glanced toward Patricia. "The association did. Did you pay anyone?" Patricia interrupted immediately. "Michael, this is not an appropriate conversation." I looked at Evan instead. He hesitated, then said, "We paid a deposit in the first 2 months under the agreement." The expression on his face told me he had just realized why I was asking. Patricia closed her folder. "Any financial arrangements are between the occupants and the association." I almost answered, but stopped myself. The children were inside. Evan and Laura had boxes unpacked. Their family photographs were already sitting on furniture that belonged to my father. Whatever Patricia had done, these people had apparently walked into it believing they were legitimate occupants. They were not my enemy. Before leaving, I photographed the replacement lock from the porch with Evan's permission. I photographed the blue minivan, the exterior condition of the house, and the association paperwork he agreed to show me. I did not enter. I did not demand that anyone pack a box. I drove to a hotel 7 miles away, set the fireproof document box on the desk, and opened my laptop. The room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and stale air conditioning. I pulled up the county recorder's online property index first. My name was still there. Then the county treasurer's website. Taxes current. Insurance portal. Active. Utility accounts. Active. Nothing on those screens suggested the house belonged to anyone except me. The next morning, I was standing at the county recorder's office when the doors opened. I requested certified copies of the deed history for 1847, Hawthorne Lane, and every recorded instrument connected to the parcel. The clerk returned with a packet less than half an inch thick. I sat at a wooden table beneath fluorescent lights and read every page. No transfer to Willow Creek Estates. No foreclosure deed. No court order. No recorded document giving Patricia possession of my house. Then I opened my laptop and searched for the email she had sent 5 months earlier. There it was. Her own sentence on my screen. The association could not proceed with temporary occupancy without my written authorization. Directly beneath it was my answer denying permission. I read both messages again. Patricia had not misunderstood my decision. She had asked. I had refused. And somewhere between that email and the new lock on my front door, she had decided my answer no longer mattered. By noon, I had enough certified paper to prove what I already knew, but proving ownership and understanding what Patricia had done were two different things. I spent the afternoon at a coffee shop across from the county building, spreading documents across a corner table while the espresso machine hissed behind me. The deed history was clean. My father had transferred the property to me legally. The transfer had been recorded. No later instrument changed ownership. There was no foreclosure, no court order granting possession to Willow Creek Estates, and nothing showing that I had appointed the association as my property manager. I called my attorney, Mark Ellison, who had handled a commercial contract dispute for me several years earlier. I explained everything from Patricia's original occupancy request to the changed lock and the Mitchell family. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked one question. Do you still have her email saying she needed your authorization? I looked at the printed copy beside my coffee. Yes. Keep the original electronic message too. Do not alter anything, and do not try to remove the family yourself. That was already my plan. Mark asked me to send him the deed records, tax statements, association correspondence, police incident number, and photographs. Then he told me to document every communication from that point forward. I returned to Hawthorne Lane near sunset, but I stayed on the sidewalk. Evan was outside taking cardboard boxes toward the garage. When he saw me, he stopped. Can we talk? He asked. We stood near the mailbox while orange light reflected off the front windows. He looked exhausted. Patricia told us the owner had entered some kind of long-term vacancy arrangement with the association. I never did. She said the house was available for at least a year. I asked whether he still had the paperwork. He nodded. Then he told me something Patricia had carefully avoided mentioning. The Mitchells had paid a $2,400 security deposit and $1,800 for each of their first 2 months. The payments went according to instructions provided with the occupancy agreement. Evan pulled out his telephone and showed me the confirmations. I did not photograph them until he gave permission. The agreement identified Willow Creek Estates as the administering party. My name appeared nowhere on the signature page. We sold most of our furniture before moving here, he said quietly. We thought this was legitimate. That was when the shape of the problem changed. Patricia had not simply put strangers into my house. She had placed a family inside a legal mess they did not understand and taken money under an arrangement I had explicitly rejected. Evan, I do not think you caused this, I said. He looked toward the house, where Laura was helping one of their children close the curtains. So what happens to us? I do not know yet, but I am not going to make your family pay for somebody else's decision. The next morning, Mark sent a formal records demand to Willow Creek Estates. It requested the exact governing provision Patricia relied upon, every notice supposedly sent to me, board minutes approving entry, locksmith invoices, the Mitchell occupancy agreement, payment records, and any document granting the association authority to possess or manage my property. Patricia answered before the end of the day. Her response was 3 pages long. She cited community standards, vacant property provisions, maintenance obligations, and the board's duty to protect neighborhood values. She used the word authority 11 times. What she did not include was the one thing Mark had asked for directly. No deed, no court order, no authorization from me. I read her response twice, then forwarded it to Mark. He called 5 minutes later. Do not argue with her, he said. Ask her one question. So I did. I opened a new email and typed, please identify the specific recorded document or signed authorization that gave Willow Creek Estates the right to take possession of 1847 Hawthorne Lane. Then I pressed send. Patricia had spent months creating paperwork. Now I wanted to see whether any of it could answer a single sentence. Patricia waited until the next morning to answer my question, and when her email arrived, it was longer than the one before it. She quoted sections of the Willow Creek governing documents about property maintenance, nuisance prevention, emergency access, and the board's responsibility to preserve community standards. She described my 5-month absence as an extended vacancy. She claimed repeated notices had gone unanswered. She said the board had acted in good faith to prevent deterioration and protect neighboring property values. What she still did not provide was a document giving Willow Creek Estates possession of my house. I forwarded the message to Mark without responding. 10 minutes later, he called. She answered everything except what you asked. I noticed. Good. Let her keep doing that. So I did. Over the next 4 days, I sent 3 short questions, each one narrower than the last. Had I ever signed an agreement authorizing Willow Creek Estates to manage the property? Patricia replied that association authority did not depend exclusively on individual consent. Had any court transferred possession of 1847 Hawthorne Lane to the association? She replied that no litigation had been necessary because the board acted under existing community procedures. Was there any recorded instrument naming Willow Creek Estates as owner, lessee, receiver, trustee, or authorized property manager? Patricia answered that my interpretation of property law was overly narrow. I saved every message as a digital file and printed each one. Then something unexpected happened. Two board members contacted Mark separately. They had been copied on Patricia's responses and wanted to know why she would not simply produce the authorization she kept implying existed. One of them, Robert Hayes, sent us minutes from a closed board discussion held while I was away. The minutes described my house as a non-responsive vacant property and authorized Patricia to pursue temporary occupancy if permitted under association council guidance. That last phrase mattered. If permitted. The minutes did not say council had approved taking possession. They did not say the board owned the house. They did not even say I had consented. Patricia had apparently treated conditional language like a blank check. Evan added another piece that evening. He met me in the hotel lobby carrying the original occupancy packet. The agreement listed Willow Creek Estates as administrator, but the section identifying the legal property owner had been left blank. He had never noticed. Neither had Laura. On the payment instruction page, the deposit and monthly occupancy payments were directed to an association-controlled account. I scanned the documents with Evan's permission and sent copies to Mark. She told us this was normal, Evan said. We had 30 days to move out of our apartment. We trusted the letterhead. I looked at him across the small lobby table. Keep every receipt. He nodded. You too. For the first time since I had returned, I smiled. The next afternoon, Mark sent the board a formal demand for an emergency meeting and requested that association council attend. Attached were the certified deed history, my tax records, Patricia's original email requesting permission, my written refusal, her later claims of authority, the board minutes, and the Mitchell occupancy agreement. Patricia responded within an hour. She called the demand unnecessary and accused me of escalating a manageable community matter. Mark did not debate her. He sent one final message. Please preserve all records concerning entry, occupancy, payments, notices, locksmith services, and board authorization related to 1847 Hawthorne Lane. That evening, the emergency meeting notice arrived. Thursday, 7 in the evening, Willow Creek Clubhouse. I closed my laptop and opened the fireproof box on the hotel desk. Beneath my father's closing papers was the original recorded deed, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges, county stamp still visible. Patricia had spent months explaining why the association believed it could control my house. On Thursday night, she was going to have to explain it while the document proving who owned it was sitting in the room. Thursday evening, I arrived at the Willow Creek Clubhouse 15 minutes early with the fireproof document box tucked under my arm. The parking lot was already crowded. Through the front windows, I could see Patricia arranging folders at the board table like this was another meeting she expected to control. She wore a navy blazer, her blonde hair perfectly arranged, and when I entered, she gave me the same measured smile she had used on my porch. Mark was beside me. Evan and Laura sat near the back with their occupancy folder between them. Robert Hayes and 4 other board members took their seats while the association attorney, Susan Whitaker, opened a legal pad and asked everyone to keep the discussion focused on 1847 Hawthorne Lane. Patricia began first. She described my house as a prolonged vacant property that had created maintenance and community concerns. She said repeated notices went unanswered and claimed the temporary occupancy arrangement had been adopted to protect neighborhood stability. Susan listened, then asked, what document authorized the association to take possession of Mr. Carter's property? Patricia opened her binder. The governing documents provide broad enforcement authority. I understand, Susan said. I am asking about possession. Patricia turned several pages. The vacancy provisions allow corrective measures. Susan repeated the question. Where is the instrument granting possession? The room became quiet enough that I could hear the ventilation system above us. Patricia finally said, there is no single instrument because the authority comes from the governing documents collectively. Mark looked at me. That was our moment. I placed the fireproof box on the table and opened it. The metal latch made a small click that sounded louder than it should have. I removed my father's closing papers first, then the original recorded deed. The paper was slightly yellow at the edges, but the county stamp was still clear. I laid the certified current title record beside it. Then came my tax statements, insurance records, utility accounts, landscaping invoices, and the email Patricia had sent 5 months earlier. Susan read it silently. Then she read my response denying authorization. She looked at Patricia. You requested Mr. Carter's written permission before he left. Patricia shifted in her chair. That was one possible procedure. And he refused. Yes, but circumstances changed. Did ownership change? Patricia said nothing. Was there a foreclosure? No. A court order? No. Did Mr. Carter later authorize occupancy? Patricia's fingers tightened around her pen. Not directly. Robert leaned forward. What does not directly mean? Patricia looked toward him. The board had obligations to the community. I slid the closed fireproof box aside and pointed to the deed. That community does not own my house. Patricia turned toward me. You left it vacant for months. I left it empty. I did not give it away. Susan picked up the board minutes Robert had provided. These minutes authorized Patricia to explore temporary occupancy, if permitted under council guidance. I do not see approval from council here. Another board member looked at Patricia. Did council approve it? Patricia's expression finally changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Her eyes dropped toward the papers instead of meeting ours. I believed we had sufficient authority. Susan closed the minutes. Belief is not the document I asked for. For months, Patricia had hidden behind words like enforcement, vacancy, standards, and community interest. Now every one of those words was sitting on the table beside the original deed, and none of them changed the name printed on it. Then a chair scraped softly behind me. Evan stood up holding his folder. There is something else the board needs to see, he said. Evan walked to the board table and placed his folder beside my deed. Laura followed him, carrying a smaller envelope filled with receipts. Patricia watched them approach, and for the first time that evening, she looked genuinely uncertain about what was coming next. Evan opened the occupancy agreement to the signature page. We were told Willow Creek Estates had authority to place our family in this house, he said. We asked specifically whether the owner had approved it. Susan looked toward him. What were you told? Evan glanced at Patricia. That all necessary approvals had been handled through the association. Patricia immediately straightened. I explained that the board was administering the property under its vacancy procedures. That is not what you told me, Evan said. His voice stayed calm. You told me we did not need to contact the owner because the association was authorized to manage the house. Laura placed the receipts on the table. And we paid according to the instructions you gave us. Susan picked up the first receipt. $2,400. Security deposit. Then the first monthly payment. $1,800. Then another $1,800. She looked at the agreement again. Where were these funds deposited? Patricia answered carefully. Into an association-controlled account designated for the occupancy program. Robert leaned forward. We have an occupancy program account. Nobody answered him. Another board member, Denise Parker, opened her laptop and searched through the financial reports. I have never seen that listed separately. Patricia shook her head. The funds were categorized under property stabilization. Mark finally spoke. Was Mr. Carter ever informed that money was being collected in connection with the use of his property? Susan looked at me. Were you? No. Did you receive any of it? Not $1. The room went still again. Patricia began explaining that the payments were intended to offset administrative expenses, maintenance, cleaning, and neighborhood costs associated with vacant properties. Susan interrupted her. Before we discuss expenses, I need the authorization for collecting occupancy payments on a privately titled residence. Patricia opened another folder. Paper moved quickly beneath her hands, but nothing came out. Then Denise found something on her laptop. Patricia, the locksmith invoice was charged to property stabilization too. She turned the screen toward Susan. So was the cleaning service. Robert stared at Patricia. Did the board vote to replace Michael's lock? Patricia's answer came slower this time. The board authorized necessary corrective measures. Robert pulled the meeting minutes closer. These minutes say temporary occupancy could be explored if permitted. They do not authorize changing locks. Patricia looked around the table as if she expected someone to rescue the interpretation she had relied on for months. Nobody did. Susan gathered the deed, the email chain, the Mitchell agreement, and copies of the receipts into one stack. Effective immediately, no additional occupancy payments should be collected until this matter is reviewed. All related records need to be preserved. No one should alter access to the property without legal guidance. Patricia's face tightened. This is being turned into something it is not. I looked at Evan, then at Laura, then at the papers between us. It already became something else when you gave another family keys to a house you did not own. Patricia did not answer. The board voted to suspend her authority over property enforcement and financial decisions connected to the occupancy program, while outside counsel reviewed the records. Nobody cheered. Evan and Laura looked relieved and frightened at the same time. I understood why. My deed proved the house was mine, but it did not make their problem disappear. As the meeting ended, Evan gathered his papers and asked me quietly, "What happens now?" I looked at the original deed, then toward Patricia's empty chair. Now we fix what she put both of us into. It took 17 days to unwind what Patricia had created, and none of those days looked like the dramatic ending people imagine when they hear that someone else has been living in your house. There were telephone calls, attorney letters, insurance questions, board meetings, account reviews, and careful arrangements for the Mitchell family. Susan made one thing clear after the emergency meeting. Nobody was going to solve Patricia's mistake by creating another one. Evan and Laura were given time to secure another home, and Willow Creek agreed to cover their reasonable moving expenses while the board reviewed the money they had paid into the occupancy account. The $2,400 deposit and both $1,800 monthly payments were identified and frozen from further use, while the association's outside accountant traced the account. I never asked Evan for rent. I had never rented him the house, and pretending otherwise would have made Patricia's paperwork look more legitimate than it was. Instead, Mark prepared an agreement confirming that the Mitchells would leave voluntarily on a specific date and that I was not waiving any claim against the association by allowing an orderly move. On their final Saturday, I drove to Hawthorne Lane just after 9 in the morning. A moving truck sat in the driveway where the blue minivan had been the day I returned. Evan carried the last cardboard box from the garage while Laura checked the kitchen cabinets. Their children waited in the minivan with backpacks beside them. Before leaving, Evan handed me the replacement front door key Patricia's locksmith had given him. "I am sorry this happened," he said. I closed my hand around the key. "You did not take my house, Evan. You were told you had permission." He nodded toward the clubhouse down the street. "I hope they remember the difference." So did I. The outside review eventually confirmed what the documents at the meeting had already shown. The board had never received a deed, court order, signed owner authorization, or legal opinion granting Willow Creek possession of 1847 Hawthorne Lane. Patricia had expanded conditional board language into authority the records did not support. She was removed from property enforcement responsibilities, and weeks later she resigned as president after the board began reviewing other vacancy actions approved during her term. The association reimbursed the Mitchells for the payments connected to the arrangement and covered the cost of restoring my locks and security system. My violation notices were withdrawn. New procedures required written legal review before the association could take any action involving access to an owner's residence. On the afternoon the house was formally returned to me, a locksmith installed a new deadbolt while I stood on the porch listening to dry leaves scrape across the driveway. When he finished, he handed me 2 new keys. I slid one into the lock. It turned smoothly. Click. Such a small sound, but after 17 days it felt like the house recognizing me again. Inside, the rooms were quiet. The yellow curtains were gone. The Mitchell family photographs were gone. My father's walnut entry table stood uncovered, and his rocking chair was still beneath the front window where they had moved it. I carried it back beside the fireplace and ran my hand across the worn wooden arm. Then I opened the fireproof box on the kitchen table. The original deed rested exactly where I had placed it. Patricia had changed the locks, moved another family inside, collected money, and surrounded the whole thing with official-looking paperwork. But she had overlooked the one document none of her letters could rewrite. I returned the deed to the box, closed the metal latch, and listened as the old furnace clicked on from the garage. The house had been empty. It had never been theirs.